Hey people, it's NIyas713. Now this is from BBC.com. Now I want to begin with, I've talked about Black Panther before, and people say to me, we need to get rid of the negative images of black people. And I say, people aren't using their logic. Where is the bad image of black people coming from? Hollywood. And this film, Birth of a Nation, has a lot to do with it. This was one of the, I think, first blockbusters that they ever had. It was screened in the White House. I think this marked the beginning of modern Hollywood, and it was extremely racist. Now I'm going to read this article. Let's go. D.W. Griffith's film was released on 8 February 1915. A century later, it's regarded as a landmark in cinema history and terribly bigoted. Tom Brooke reports. 100 years after it was made, The Birth of a Nation still has the power to both enthrall and appall. The film is as confounding as ever, both brilliant and repugnant. Groundbreaking in its use of innovative cinema techniques, it remains tainted by its brazen racism. The Birth of a Nation was the creation of D.W. Griffith, who has tried his hand as an actor and playwright, but whose real genius lay in filmmaking. Nothing on its scale had ever been attempted before. It was the epic story of the relationship between two American families, one Union, the other Confederate, at the time of the Civil War and the Reconstruction that followed. The film ran for more than 3 hours and employed, according to a New York Times report from the Times, 18,000 people and 3,000 horses. By 1922, it had been watched by more than 5 million people. It was the first blockbuster. It was a box office success, a mainstream film, so utterly mainstream, says Professor Alan Rice, Birth of a Nation expert at the Institute for Black Atlantic Research at the University of Central Lancashire, who has been organizing a series of symposia on the film. It made history by becoming the first film ever to be screened at the White House. And for those of you, I made a film about, President Wilson made the first Nuremberg laws, and if I can't remember, I'll put it in the description so you can check that out as well. But it was revolutionary for another reason. It was very important, and that says it was first full-scale narrative using a lot of the new techniques of filmmaking, says Rice. The use of night photography, panoramic long shots, montage, and parallel editing all worked extremely well, as did the war scenes involving legions of extras. Many classic battles in modern cinema, from Braveheart to The Lord of the Rings, are said to have drawn from the battle sequences in The Birth of a Nation. It's the building block film. There would be no extended movie narrative without Griffith. It is a film that showed the world about the potential of cinema, says Armand White, who reviews movies for National Review and Out magazine. The picture establishes a narrative structure as still being copied by modern Hollywood. The way it works, the sweeping historical epic, you put families divided by war and place a romance story at the center, says Paul McEwen, who is the author of a forthcoming book in the BFI Classic series on the film. That's also what Titanic is. That's what most of those kinds of films are, and that's how those still work to this day. 2 steps back. But for all its magnificence, what is inescapable is, in any assessment of The Birth of a Nation, is the troubling racism that leaps off the screen. The film is one of the most racist films ever made. Maybe the most racist film ever made, says Ellen Scott, author of the just published Cinema Civil Rights. This film actually depicts lynching as a positive thing, she says. The politics of the film was essential to say certain black people are worthy of being lynched. In that sense, it's extremely racist. And this is why I say it's important, because this was just a few years before loads of lynchings happened. The Red Summer of 1919, the burning down of Rosewood in Florida, the burning down of Tulsa in Oklahoma, and so many more. It's not a coincidence that this preceded this wave of lynchings and violence against black people. Professor Rice also finds the specifics of the black man who's lynched troubling. He's the black rapist figure who is the stereotype of the black man whose eyes are only for white women. This played deeply into the pervasive fear of miscegnation. Whatever role D.W. Griffith may have played in bringing a racist film to the screen, the root of much of the bigotry can be located in source material, a racist text called The Klansman, written by Thomas Dixon Jr. McEwen sees the underlying story as deeply flawed. The film argues that giving black people rights was a terrible, terrible error, that they did all sorts of horrible things that actually they didn't do, and that the noble Ku Klux Klan, KKK, was this wonderful savior that saved America, he says. It couldn't be any more wrong. The film is credited while revising the racist KKK, who adopted it as a recruitment tool. The Ku Klux Klan had been kind of a dead organization by 1915, but when the film came out and became a hit, the KKK was refounded, capitalized on the film's success, and in the 1920s became a massive organization at the peak of nativist fervor in the United States, says Paul McEwen. It also inaugurated the use of certain kinds of racial stereotypes. which then became repeated again and again right up until the 1960s and even beyond, says Rice. As a case in point, he cites a particular moment in the film that showed black lawmakers in South Carolina as certain bestial simians, basically monkeys, eating fried chicken and bananas, leering at white women in the galleries. But in the film's racism was heightened because critics and film historians have judged it to be so brilliant in its use of cinematic techniques. I don't think we remember this film as we do had it not been for the way Griffith used parallel editing and shows us the KKK rushing in to save the heroine on horseback, no less, Ellen Scott says. And he cross-cuts that image with the image of a black man attacking various people. So we have two images cut together. Oh, hang on, where's my place? Up. And in some sense, the suspense that creates is the main impact of the film. I think the film's techniques were woven in with the film's racist power, art out of atrocity. The prevailing view is that the film's racism doesn't ultimately detract from its technical and artistic prowess. It absolutely does not, says White. There are many works of art that have elements of them that people may find objectionable. It doesn't necessarily change their aesthetic value or doesn't necessarily change the imagination or intelligence in them, he says. The racist paradoxes of The Birth of a Nation are ones we have to live with, but we're only fooling ourselves if we deny the film's greatness. The Birth of a Nation isn't alone. There are other films that are considered works of art, but also boast distressing content, such as German director Leni Riefenstahl's 1935 film, Triumph of the Will. It was beautifully shot, breaking new ground with its use of cinematography and music, but was made in Nazi propaganda. Like The Birth of a Nation, it too has provoked considerable debate. At that time, though, the Holocaust had not happened for 6 years, so it wasn't anywhere near as controversial as they portrayed now. That's the best analogy, says McEwen. No one denied that Triumph of the Will is incredibly well made, and that's actually what made it dangerous. If it was terrible, then it wouldn't have worked. Over the years, there have been efforts to ban The Birth of a Nation, however. Early attempts to censor the movie in the US at the time of its release were orchestrated by the newly formed National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. The NAACP was very conflicted about whether the film should be banned, says Scott, who points out that many of the organization's members also supported civil liberties, and that included freedom of expression. Many attempts to ban the film failed because of sex immorality, not racism, was seen as the most pressing problems in cinema at the time, and Griffith and his cohorts had an army of lawyers to fight an effort to censor his picture. Nowadays, few people want to see it banned, particularly in academia. Actually, just go back to that. So that's the thing. A lot of black people need representation in the courts because a lot of these things aren't, a lot of the crimes that black people are convicted of, they're not actually guilty, but they don't have legal protection. But let's go on. I think the historical distance is great enough that we can see it as a product of a particular historical moment. Historical moments, not hysterical, says Ellen Scott. In fact, many scholars think it most definitely should be seen. When it is shown, it should be shown within the context of a debate. Censoring would make it more underground. It would play into the hands of the racists who would say we can't debate with the film, says Professor Rice. In fact, Rice doesn't view the film as a historical artifact at all. He cites the work of U.S. sound artist D.J. Spooky. He's a young African-American who's made a response to the film called Rebirth of a Nation, which mixes images of the film with his own soundtrack. It's an attempt to challenge the assumption of the film. I think the legacy really is that we don't lie down in front of these images, Rice says. They create works of art that speak back to those images and create new realities, he says. The Birth of a Nation is 100 years old and it's a film that's not going to go away. It's part of America's cultural legacy. It is also, on the centenary, a disconcerting reminder of one's interpretation of modern American genesis. It shows the birth of a nation in a land where racism was rife. What's most troubling is that 100 years later, the racism depicted by Griffith in his epic, which, while far less egregious today, still remains remarkably routine. Yes, and I want to also talk about this. Professor Black Truth talked about the change of the view, the change of how the police were viewed. Now he says back in the 50s and the 40s, the police were viewed very, very badly. But with the advent of Dragnet and other police shows making police seem like heroes, in fact, you can see so many different shows showing police as heroes that it changes the public's view of the police. They're good people, and also concurrently black people are viewed as villains, drug dealers, prostitutes, pimps, gangsters, and just all around bad people. So the police are good, the black people are bad. Therefore, in real life, if the police shot a black person or killed them, they were in the right. And it was Dragnet was so valued by the police that William Parker, the chief of police of LAPD, endorsed it. Anyway, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to support this channel, you leave my cash up. I'll leave this article in the description. Want to follow me on Instagram? I'll leave that there as well. If you want to buy one of my t-shirts, I'll leave that there as well. Peace.